Jircniv, Farlord, Rune, Nix's ascent to power was indeed a bloody one, and today we are going to take a look at the rise of the fresh blood emperor. And let's start at the very beginning. Since his early childhood, Jircniv was groomed for emperorhood and received an education directly from Fluda Peridane, who has served under and outlived many emperors before Jircniv was even born. And apparently he was a good teacher, and it was more akin to a father-son relationship than that of a mentor and scholar. But nonetheless, just like a warrior learns how to handle his weapon, how to defeat his opponents, how to unravel and exploit their weak spots, while simultaneously avoiding any injury to himself, Jircniv was trained to fight on the battlefield of politics. He was trained to see behind shrouded intentions and veiled threats. He was trained how to read and manipulate his opponents. He was taught how to behave himself, how to dress and appear, and how to impress those subservient to him. During this time, his calm, steady demeanor and his ability to keep a cool head has formed, and thus even in the face of danger he was still able to come to rational decisions. So just like he later came to demand competence from those subservient to him, he demonstrated those values himself. In contrast to so many nobles in the empire and especially in the kingdom, Jircniv led by being an example and an inspiration, but his rise to the top wasn't as smooth as planned. During his early adolescence, the emperor died, and his mother was found guilty of poisoning him and subsequently executed. And after the position of emperor became vacant, a power struggle ensued. And now Jircniv, who was already a great politician, played his hand. In a cold disregard of blood ties, former friendships, and any moral, he, like a true prince, did what was necessary to secure power, while other candidates for the throne had family names, age, honorary titles, and of course the house's soldiers. Jircniv had the wits necessary to turn those advantages to nothing, and to him any threat of violence was quickly revealed to be empty, since Jircniv had Fluda Peridane backing him up. And so Jircniv, who purged his inner circle, ascended to emperorhood. And one of his first moves was the declaration of war against the Re-Estize kingdom, because while the other noble houses and their private armies were already conspiring to dethrone the then child emperor, the declaration of war, the duty of the battlefield, made it necessary to commit their troops to a greater cause first, or be seen as a traitor in the eyes of everybody else. And unlike later battles, the Imperial Army charged head-on into the spear lines of the Re-Estize kingdom, and suffered great losses when compared to the skirmishes of the following year. And it can be assumed that the emperor planned for this, and that the troops who died were primarily loyal to the nobility rather than the emperor himself. Their defeat at the Cat's Plain was also a great pretext to start with the greater purge of nobility. Now stripped of their private armies, the nobles in direct opposition to him were outright killed, their lands and property seized and granted to the state or redistributed to other more competent personnel. Nobles who were of no particular threat, but not useful either, were left in an ambiguous, somewhat disgraced position to be used and disposed of if the need should arise. Count Famal was among those unfortunate ones. And the outright incompetent, those who didn't understand a thing about governments and the economy, aside from the conviction that all of the goods and services produced, natural birthright of the noble in question. Those were simply stripped of their lands and titles, and thereby bereft of their ability to retaliate, but otherwise left alone. Still clinging to their former glory and their old opulent lifestyle, the nobles stripped of their titles were unable to use their remaining assets to rebuild their status, and thus maybe convince the emperor that they had something more to offer than a sense of entitlement. Arche was from such a family, who still spent money that they didn't have on things that they didn't need in order to impress other nobles who were no longer around. Their once proud district in the imperial capital of Arventar was slowly decaying, and everybody could see how their might was broken, and some shady figures took advantage of their desperation and irresponsible spending habits. And therefore, in a sense, her own father killed Archer. He enshrined here, and while the legions and their loyalty to the new emperor, who rewarded merit and hard work rather than titles and traditions, were a vital instrument that should be used. After all, a standing army requires a steady upkeep. They are also precious tools, and in subsequent years, the military action taken by the Empire against the Kingdom were marked by caution and a war of attrition, rather than by a direct confrontation. The Imperial Army is perhaps akin to the teeth of a great white shark. True, they could easily enough be replaced. After all, this army has grown and expanded to the point that it had taken over parts of the Adventurer Guild's field of activity and is now partially responsible for fighting monstrous threats to the nation. But still, since the Knights, who are the equivalent of a silver-ranked adventurer, have to be trained over a considerable amount of time, and suitable candidates had to be found in the first place, losses should be avoided since they would temporarily diminish the power of the Empire. So with the support of Dumbledore and Saruman in one person on one hand, and the Imperial Legions on the other, Jircniv was in a position to use the Legions in a limited and yet incredible offensive fashion by waging an economic war via military means to conquer another nation, thereby bringing glory to the Empire and its army without bleeding its legion white. And this is something many knights are undoubtedly thankful for. And now with his position secure, his army loyal to him, his enemies dead, and a country soon to be conquered, Jircniv turned his attention inwards. And despite being an absolute monarch, the head of state and the head of military in one person, he started reforms that you would expect in a meritocracy, but not in an empire, emphasizing ability above social classes to the fresh-blood emperor. A commoner with the skill necessary to do a certain task is always preferable to a noble with a matching family name that can't be bothered to do the work required. With each of these reforms, more opportunities for the common people were created, until a positive outlook, a sense of a better tomorrow and a brighter future was commonplace in the Empire, especially in its capital. And while the workload of Jircniv as a result of the now vacant position of the nobility had increased drastically, since he now had direct control over their former territories, the Empire was already finding and training a new, competent state bureaucracy, capable of doing all the menial acts of governments in an efficient, informed manner. After all, unlike their real-world counterparts, the personnel was rewarded when things were running smoothly and punished when their task didn't get done. And in a few years, after his apparatus had fully been built, Jircniv would arrive at a point where he just had to make a general decision which would then be implemented smoothly, thanks to those subservient to him. And some of these brilliant changes in policy came from a rather unaccepted source. A spy inside the great and noble houses of the kingdom was feeding information about a third-born princess of Re-Estize and the outlandish political changes she proposed directly to the Empire. And oftentimes these propositions were directly implemented, though Jircniv was creeped out by Rune and her seemingly unexplainable behavior. And last but not least, a bit of this meritocracy took also hold in a rather unexpected place: the Imperial Bedchamber. Jircniv has built a considerable harem for himself, consisting of many beautiful ladies. And his emperor apparently is not only a potent ruler, since he fathered numerous, albeit illegitimate children, without any right to the throne, unless legitimized by him. And one of the members of his harem was not a shining beauty, but pretty bright otherwise. She had wits and the mind necessary to talk politics with the fresh-blood emperor himself. And Jircniv hoped that this keen intellect would also be present in their offspring. In Jircniv's mind, the sharpest and brightest of his children, with the temper necessary for court politics and a thing or two for governments, would get the throne. Which also leads to a question: what would have happened if Jircniv had died during these days? Well, the great progress made so far would at least come to a temporary halt, and chaos and infighting would ensue, thereby endangering the stability of the Empire. In the case of a sudden death of Emperor Jircniv, the illegitimate bastards and their mothers would be an initial problem, since now the throne is disputed, but the 4 Imperial Knights on one hand and Fluda Paradane on the other likely had known to a certain extent that Jircniv had planned to put the smartest child on the throne, regardless if it was the first or last born. And since Fluda Paradane is still around, he could teach him like he fought so many emperors before, while his presence alone is a great deterrent to any outside forces who plan to use the uncertainty of the moment to conquer the Empire. After all, Fluda Paradane, in combination with his students, managed to carpet bomb a Death Knight into submission. So even if the Beastman army should invade after devouring the kingdom, and even if Alventar, the capital, is somehow taken by an incoming Beastman horde, the release of the Death Knight trapped in the basement below, and Fluda's aerial presence, together with elements of the Royal Air Guard and his chosen scholars, will make sure that any victory won against the Empire will be Pyrrhic indeed. So you could say even with Emperor Jircniv dead, the Empire endures, but much of the progress that had been made so far would have been stopped. And now with the rise of Jircniv covered, let's look at his downfall in the next video. And with that said, thank you for watching, I hope to see you all again soon, have a nice day, over and out.